So again, just welcome. We're going to welcome our speakers tonight, Ian and Amy Thompson. They're going to get us to talk about what they do out on their farm. So I think I'll just let you guys take it away. All right.
Olito, Choctaw Ian Thompson, former Choctaw Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for Facility. Magnetar, Nan Awaya, Osapa Hashimalachi, Lapato, Hikili Katsanayota, Noti Hashitapanolika.
Hi, Philosophies, Amy Thompson. And
She's my wife.
I'm his wife, yes.
So my presentation is going to be integrated, it's going to be holistic. We're doing it from the perspective of Choctaw people. I serve as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and Amy, my wife, works at the Choctaw Cultural Center. So we're going to tell you about a holistic experiment that we've done in native plants. It's still ongoing, and we'll do it from a Choctaw perspective. The Choctaw people are the third largest Native American tribe in the country. We have over 200,000 tribal members in Oklahoma. There are two other federally recognized Choctaw groups in the southeast in our homeland. For those of you who don't know us, we're located in about the southeastern 1/5 of the state of Oklahoma. This is maybe a little bit hard for you to see, but it's an image of the Choctaw homeland broken up into ecozones according to the Choctaw linguistic terminology for each of those different types of plant communities. And this is our homeland right here, most of Mississippi and part of Western Alabama. There's so much that we could share with you. I'm not going to go into all of that, but if you have more questions as we conclude, I'll be glad to come back to this. It's not exactly Oklahoma native plants in the southeastern United States.
This is the Longleaf pine forest that existed in Mississippi. And as you can see, this is a small little Choctaw man down here. He's sitting down, of course, but the tallest you can see was very tall prior to European civilization, or you could say whenever they came over. And basically, with that in mind, the Choctaw people itself used to live with the land. And so basically, instead of trying to force some things to come about, like the growth of plants and stuff, what they did was kind of live with the harmonies of the land.
And they also managed it carefully. So this is the southern part of Choctaw country here. The Longleaf pine forest is basically a tall grass prairie. These longleaf pine trees in it, 80 feet to the first branch. Even so, you can see the sunlight getting to the understory back there. It's because
How many feet to the first branch?
80. It's enormous. Old growth. These trees were 300-400 years old when this picture was taken. But even so, like I was saying, you can see the sunlight hitting the ground back there because of the way it was managed. This is the Choctaw homeland. Choctaw people came to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears beginning in the 1830s through 1903. When Choctaw people left our homeland, an ecological disaster ensued. This is that longleaf pine forest. This is what happened to it. We could go through the stats. The same thing happened to the tallgrass prairie, upland forest, lowland river camp community. You guys know what happened pretty much. So in Oklahoma, this is what Choctaw people encountered on the Trail of Tears in southeastern Oklahoma. This is Kavanaugh Hill. It's near Poto, for those of you not familiar with the immediate area. And what do you see here? What type of plant community do you see?
Pine forest.
Yep, pine forest. What about this? Meadows. Yep. So basically, you're looking at a heterogeneous ecological community. You've got pine, you've got deciduous, you've got little prairie areas, little glades. You know, that means a complex habitat, which leads to lots of resources for people and also different types of animals. Another image from the Poto region, 1834. You can see it's open prairie mixed with some savanna, some denser stands of trees. Canadian River, same thing. You've got really diverse landscapes, really diverse native plant communities. So this changed too, of course. Choctaw lands were ultimately broken up. They were allotted to individual families. And in the 1920s, the federal government encouraged Choctaw landowners to lease out land to sharecroppers. So at that time, southeastern Oklahoma had the highest incidence of sharecropping in the country. The sharecroppers that came in, they were just trying to make a living, but they didn't think about the long-term sustainability and health of the land. So they created massive soil erosion. There are lots of accounts from the 20s and 30s that talk about land that used to support corn and cotton becoming to where it could only support grass. So we've set up Nan Awaya Farm, and this is an experiment in land-based Choctaw traditional culture within the Choctaw Reservation. And you can see our main goals here. I don't necessarily have to read that to you, but basically it's about taking Choctaw traditional culture forward into a modern context in a way that can improve quality of life. The native plants play a huge part in that.
As you can see, our farm is located in southeastern part of Oklahoma within the Choctaw Nation. It's almost up in the heart of it. And basically, we've been living there for the past 5 years and was able to see what kind of changes that the land has had during this time.
We're located in Etoka County. This is the farm right here. It's an individual Choctaw allotment, 160 acres. It's passed through several hands since then, but it's never been subdivided and it's never been plowed. However, it has been abused. These are aerial photos from the 40s and 60s. You can see it's been clear cut. It's been massively overgrazed, huge erosion problems. But again, it's never been plowed. So this is what it looked like when we purchased it in 2015. And you see you've got bare soil there. This isn't even a drought like what we've got right now. But you've got massive problems with the soil health and with the ecosystem processes here because of so much abuse for the last century. So in order to heal that, the first thing we have to do for the goals of the farm that we were looking at is we need to restore the ecological processes, which means restoring some of the types of plant communities that used to exist there. In looking at Choctaw traditional culture in a very deep way, there are really 4 aspects to land management. And these go back to the earliest Choctaw roots in our homeland. We have oral stories that talk about interacting with the Pleistocene megafauna on the Black Belt Prairie. And archaeology tells us that those animals went extinct about 11,000 years ago. So we're talking 600 generations of experience with the land here. And that sort of distills down to these four philosophies for land management: respect, purity, diversity, and considering the whole. So we'll go through each one for the start of our presentation to talk about how those were implemented on the land and what the results were, particularly for native plants.
We're building the whole, pretty much what we're doing with it. It's just instead of using the manufactured ways of doing things like you would see nowadays, we started with our animals. So so basically they're the ones that kind of help our buffalo help us to kind of not only plant but also carry the seeds from places to places to pretty much just to help water our places and stuff.
So we let the land go fallow for a year because again, it had been seriously overgrazed. And then we moved in this keystone species. A lot of people don't think of southeastern Oklahoma as bison country, but you have to think about the past as something that's really fluid. So at certain times in the past, bison absolutely lived there. Like, for example, the early 1800s, the area was full of bison. If you look at the accounts from the 18 teens, 30s, 50s, and they had a major impact on the landscape. They're also important culturally. So we wanted to reintroduce them as a means for restarting some of the ecological processes with the native plant community and with the soils. It's not enough just to bring the animals there, though. They don't have some type of magic ability to restore land. They have a propensity to manage for prairies if you let them be bison, but you have to do that in a certain way. The way that we did it goes back to trying to treat the land with respect. So it had been seriously overgrazed, like we've mentioned a couple of times. In order to allow it to have the benefits of the animals, but not get overgrazed, we broke it up into 22 different pastures. We rotate the whole herd through each pasture. So basically that gives each piece of land more than 20 times as much rest as it spends getting grazed. particularly in a case like this, where the land's suffering from overgrazing, that helps those palatable plants to rebuild their root systems, to go to seed, to reproduce themselves and start to spread. So this is a close-up of one of these green lines here. This is the fence. This area has been grazed for about 4 days by the herd, and then they're moved off of it. And so you can see they have some impact there. You know, they put some manure down, they dropped some seeds from their coats. There was a PhD dissertation that was dedicated to looking at how many seeds the average bison cook carries. And they found it was 1,200 seeds. And the bison, you guys may or may not know, they shed their hair every spring. And they're migratory animals. So if they pick up seeds in the fall and carry those all the way to spring, those could be hundreds of miles away. They also have certain characteristics. They create wallows, which cattle don't do. They love to destroy cedar trees. You know, cedars are in a lot of areas. The bison love to rub their horns on it, then rub their backs on it, get that sap on them. And that, I guess it helps keep the insects off, but they just love it. In the sun, you can see them all coated in the sap from the trees. But this is the start of the rebuilding process here. So diversity, you know, the native prairies in our area, the savannas, woodlands, have something like 1,000 different species, 1,000 different native species. And they have all different niches. You know, basically they're absorbing the sunlight, converting it to energy, using different depths of the soil to farm microorganisms. It's just this complex, diverse, beautiful thing, and there's lots of redundancy built into it. So if you lose a species or two, or it's a bad year for a few species, the others jump in and fill the void. This is a picture you've probably seen. This is introduced pasture grass. You can see its roots down there like 6 inches. You can see the roots of some of these other things going down 12 feet into the soil. By having all of that root mass in the soil, of course, they're absorbing carbon and putting it into the soil, but they're also farming microorganisms. You know, this is, of course, one of the most famous ones. But there have been studies, and 1 tablespoon of soil has something like 10 million microscopic organisms in it, most of which haven't even been named. But they all have different roles to play with plant growth, with soil stability, with carbon sequestration, with nutrient cycling, all of these things. So if you have these tiny little roots from introduced grasses, there's not that much interface for all the microbes in the soil. If you have these massive prairie roots, then there's thousands of times more opportunity for these little guys to thrive. So just from the plants that managed to survive out there, we've had lots and lots of stuff coming up. But over the years, we found that some types of plants that should be out there are rare or completely missing, just from the years of abuse and overgrazing. So we work to reintroduce those. We go to local prairies in our area. In the prairies, we sustainably hand collect the seeds. For some things we can't find, we purchase some seeds as well. But then we go out and plant them on the land. We've experimented with 8 or 9 different techniques to get the native plants going out there in the pastures as efficiently as possible. This is one technique that we use, like if there's a certain plant that's missing from a landscape that should be there, but we don't want to replant the whole landscape. For example, these are all native plants here. If we were to come in and plow that, we would destroy this whole native plant community just to get that additional species in there. So instead of doing that, what we've experimented with is to go out with a garden hoe and just hoe up an area 1 foot or 2 in diameter and plant the seeds in it. We've done different experiments with mixing legumes and native grasses and forbs and all different kinds of stuff. But ultimately, we planted 9,000 patches like that out in our prairies in the last 2 years. Starting to see stuff come up. Obviously, it takes a while for the native plants to come up and get fully established, fully express themselves.
This is this is part of our land management that we have done, and it's pretty much what you would call a burn, or a rotational burn, I believe it's called. I think the first one is like from February, and let's see, as you can see, you see the chart of land right here, and then probably later in spring, I think that's pretty much how it grew. The result of it.
Fire is a natural ecosystemic process, of course, but native communities utilized fire to shape the land in the way that they wanted to. In our region, the past fire maps show that it probably burned over about every 4 years or so. So that's what the native plant communities adapted to. There are all different types of variables that you can use to change the effects of the fire. Like Amy was talking about, season is one of those. If you burn in the cool season, the effects on native plants are a lot different than if you burn in July. The fire also has different effects depending on what the land is like, depending on how much old fuel is there, so many different things. So these fires, as opposed to wildfires that come through where there's lots of old dead trees and just completely loot the whole ground, these create a patchy environment with the fire. Some areas that have burned, some that haven't, and it creates that mosaic that fosters diversity for the soil organisms as well as for what's above the ground. Of course, in a way, it resets succession, at least for some plants. These are the effects of fire on different native species. Won't go into all the details. Most of them have some type of mechanism to protect themselves or at least come back after a fire. Many of them come back stronger. Lots of studies have shown that regrowth actually increases, carbon sequestration actually increases after a burn. It definitely helps the plants in important ways. This is them coming back. This is a native pasture with the fire line. This has been burned recently. This is not. This is last year's growth. So if you were an animal, obviously you're going to come to this side to graze. Same thing for soil organisms. So the fourth pillar of traditional land management is rebuilding purity. And would you like to say how we've gone about that, Ian?
What you see here is we have several record trees within the pasture that you had just witnessed the tape for. And what we literally did is we cut down the trees. Who in here likes bread prepares? So I was just wondering about that. So, because what we mainly did with it was just we mutilated them. We cut off all the branches we could. We chopped them down and put them into this huge heap. I mean, I don't know how tall that was, but I know it's tall. But we put them in this huge heap and we let them dry for over a year so we could burn them down.
And we also sprayed the stumps with 50% glyphosate. You got to do that, or you have 10, or you have 1.
Yeah.
So some of the results. And we just like to show you a few of the pretties that came up from the seeds and the roots that managed to survive in the soil. This has been an experience for me, and it's still ongoing, learning how to identify a lot of these plants that come up on the land. I've got experience with the ones that we use culturally all the time, but here a few years ago, I was out on our land seeing these plants come up, and I realized I can't even identify most of these. So how indigenous am I if I can't even identify most of the plants on the piece of ground we live on? So we've been working really hard, and the Native Plant Society has been so helpful in learning how to identify a lot of these plants that we weren't familiar with. The land has about 50 acres of sandy sea fauna too, which is a local rare habitat type. That's where some of these come from. And it's got about 120 feet of elevation change. The uplands are dry, sandy lands. In the past, they would have been probably savanna or it's a tall grass prairie, depending on the moisture conditions. Some of them are rare. This is slender Indian grass. It's critically threatened for the state of Oklahoma. Some of them haven't been documented in our county before. This blue flower Arianga has never been documented for Atoka, but we've got hundreds of plants growing there now. We didn't plant them, they came up from what was in the ground. So that's certainly one level to appreciate, connections with the landscape, trying to manage systemically, holistically. But if you're not into native plants, you may well ask, why is it worth this effort just to have a few more flowers? Okay, but why is it really worth it? So this year we've had a blast from the future. We've had a pretty brutal summer. You can see our farm here, right next to the D4 level drought. It's as bad as drought gets. We've had, 30 something days over 100 degrees. I don't even know how many days over 90 degrees. So it sounds bad, but it also sounds a whole lot like the climate predictions for 20 years from now. What we're experiencing this summer is going to be just average pretty soon. So it gives us an opportunity to see how restoring the land affects it. Perhaps it can help it to be more resilient in the face of climate change. And that's exactly what we found. So far we've had 220 native species come back in our pastures. just from the roots and the seeds, not planting anything. That doesn't include any of the shrubs or bushes or trees. It's just the prairie plants and the sandy seed plants. When we had moved out there was no grass basically. This is an area this summer that still hasn't transitioned. We've been managing it, but some of the areas take a long time to transition back. So this still has some invasive pasture grass. It's still got sandbur, and you can see what the drought did to it. It just obliterated it. But these are some of the areas that are coming back, and this is native tall grass. It's got little blue stem. It's got Indian grass. It's got yarrow. It's got pencil flower. It's got all kinds of stuff in it. These pictures are taken at the same time at about the same elevation. You can see how this is green and still growing, while this is just completely done for the year. So why does that matter? Well, the results of that, we started fully grazing our land in 2018, and we measure forage production each year. We compare that to the amount of rainfall that we get. And between 2018 and last year, our forage production increased by 139%. So for our 160-acre ranch, that was like adding 222 acres extra land to it. Obviously, it's a lot cheaper to manage better than to buy 200 acres extra land. But it's not just that. During that period, we had 10 inches less rain. So we're talking about with 10 inches less rain, the forage production still increased by 130%. It's pretty significant. Okay, so what if you're not a rancher? Why does this matter? Here's another native plant that's come up on the place. It's pretty common. It likes burned areas and disturbed areas. For all these, I've been showing the Latin name here. And of course, Latin names have meaning. The Latin names are not the only names for these plants. This is the Choctaw name for it. Would you like to say it, Amy?
Yeah, this one's called Ipecacuanha in Kinish, which means nosebleed medicine. So it helps to stop your nosebleed if you happen to have any.
It's an astringent. You can make compounds out of the plant. When you put it on blood, it stops the flow, just like the Choctaw name says. How about this one?
This one's Hatun Falaha in Kinish, which is onion medicine. So it's pretty little garlic that shows up every spring.
And we don't talk a lot about Choctaw medicine, but all of these plants have multiple medicinal uses. It's not uncommon for some of them to have 4 or 5 different traditional uses in medicine.
This is Hashashi, which is like baby sun.
In Choctaw culture, the sun was thought of as God's eye watching the earth. And so the sunflowers, the little ones, sometimes they will move their flower, of course, to follow the sun. That's really significant culturally to keep focused on God's eye. This plant's also one of the first domesticates in North America. There are only 10 places in the world where domestication is independently developed. One of those is in the Midwestern United States. And one of the very first plants that they domesticated more than 4,000 years ago is the sunflower.
This is Kafe Uppy. Another name for it is Gumbo Hakshish, which is the root of the gumbo, which is pretty much the filet powder, filet spice that comes from the sassafras tree.
It's an amazing plant. It's ancient. It was alive in the Cretaceous. Dinosaurs would walk under the branches of this tree. And of course, it has an amazing flavor and smell. Choctaw people have, a really deep foodway that's influenced American cuisine. Choctaw food is part of the roots of Southern soul food, of Cajun cuisine, and even of barbecue. So this is one of the spices that Choctaw people gifted to the world. It's made out of these leaves that are dried and ground up, and then that's added to stew or gumbo to thicken it. It gives it a really good flavor.
This one's Tokil or Tokile Pizza, which means squint.
This is a sensitive briar. It's a beautiful native legume. The pollinators love it. It's got these compound leaves, and if you touch it, those leaves just close like a Venus flytrap. So I think it's cool, the Choctaw name for this, to squint. That means that linguistically you're conceptualizing of these leaves as somebody's eyelashes, and when you touch it, the plant squints.
So Shoma.
So this is Shomo, the thistle. We've got several different native species out there. As you guys all know, thistles have a bad name, but there are like 40 native species that are incredibly beneficial in the areas that they live. This one has, a lot of cultural uses. Some of them are contained in language. Shomo holati is the Choctaw word for blowgun dart. What that literally means is wrapped thistle. So you go out and you harvest the heads of the thistle, like right now you'd be harvesting the tall thistle. And right before they go to fluff, you take a piece of river cane and you split it and you pinch each individual head in between there, and then you wrap it all together and let it dry. That prevents these from fluffing up and blowing away. When you're ready to make a blowgun dart, you take a piece of river cane and split it. You can twist it if you want to be fancy. Then you take a strip of plant fiber and in a very certain way, you take these seed heads off of here, pull out the fluff, and then wrap them around the base of the dart. And that makes a seal that holds within the blowgun dart breech. So when you blow through it, that catches the wind just like it does for the seeds dispersing themselves. Except now you're using that characteristic from the plant to send these blowgun darts out at 100 miles an hour. They are effective. You know, I've killed squirrels with them before.
It's notchy. Milkweed.
We've got several different species of milkweed that have come up there. They have lots of uses. One of the most important is for fiber. Mochi is also the Choctaw name for hemp and linen, flax. So these plants have bast fibers in them, and you can process that and make these beautiful white fibers that our ancestors made into thread and ultimately twined into beautiful textiles. People don't think of Native Americans necessarily as having cloth, but we did for 10,000 years and more. This is one of the plants that was used for it.
It's Bisa chola, which is yucca or yucca.
So this is the species of yucca that we have in our area. The leaves also have fibers that were used for making cordage and cloth. Also, these seed stalks are one of the best things that you can use for starting a fire, traditionally fire by friction. They're pithy, they build up lots of heat. So you spin them together with under pressure and it makes these coals, and that's what you use to start your fire. With yucca, if you've got some dry pieces, it's really efficient. You can do it in a minute or less.
Ashok basi, room sedge blue stem.
This is one of the native grasses that comes back in areas that are being restored. You know, it's not as sensitive, say, as big blue stem, so it'll come back a little bit earlier. This is a full-grown bison bull out here in the broom sedge blue stem. See how tall it is? This has a lot of uses. One of them is it was harvested and used to thatch traditional houses.
Tanichi.
This is lamb's quarter. I see it come up on the Facebook page for Oklahoma Native Plant Society all the time. And like people talk about on there. It's nutritious to eat through the growing season, as the leaves have a flavor kind of like baby spinach. Spinach only grows in the cool season. This grows through the whole growing season. So you can still pick it right now and eat the leaves raw or cooked. It tastes like spinach. These are the seeds. It's a prolific seed producer. Sometimes we take those seeds and we plant them in our garden in rows like you would radishes. It creates this massive edible hedge. It's like 6 feet tall. You don't have to worry about insect problems. You don't have to water it. You don't have to worry about drought. You can just go pick this high quality spinach like stuff anytime you want through the whole growing season. And then these seeds, the plant is a relative of quinoa. So these seeds, you can process them just like quinoa and make a stew out of them or different dishes, anything you would for quinoa. This is a stew that's made out of it. It was the national dish in the eastern United States 2,000 years ago before corn agriculture. This is what all of the communities would have eaten as a staple. It's made from the seeds from the lamb's quarter that are lightly roasted, and then they're ground a little bit, and then they're boiled with hickory nuts and meat. It's really tasty.
Hata Pospachito, which burns big man, well, burns a man big, which is also king nettle or Texas bull nettle.
It's obviously a kind of caustic plant, but it's good for pollinators. It also produces edible seeds. So some of the elders have told me that when their grandparents came to Oklahoma, this plant doesn't grow in the Choctaw Homeland. But when their grandparents came to Oklahoma, they would make tongs out of split river cane, use that to pick out the seeds, and it tastes like peanuts. It's also got an edible root that goes down about 4 feet deep.
Well, if Impa Taco, cow's bed, there's also the American beauty berry.
This plant has properties that keep insects away. People will rub that on themselves to help keep ticks off. The cow's name, the Choctaw name with the cow's bed, seems to refer to an observation of animals bedding down in this plant to keep the insects off.
Opahaksung.
This is the Choctaw name for river birch. It's also the Choctaw name for fossil shells. You see fossil shells, they're pretty solid. They don't look anything like the river birch. But those shells were processed into material for creating pottery. And to do that, you burn them in a fire, and they break into a plate-like form of calcium carbonate. So they look like this. They look like all these flat flakes. They really resemble the birch bark. So the Choctaw name for the two talks about that process of using those shells to create pottery. That's a cultural aspect that's been lost from our community. And these shells are also not found in areas where a community was documented to have lived until recently. But the language documented all of that.
This one, Shonshia Koba, which means insect manufacturing. Of course, it.
For pollinator lovers, I don't think there's a cooler name than that one. It's also got properties to keep away insects. It also smells amazing. I'm tempted to use it in spaghetti sauce sometime. Maybe you guys have it before. Maybe we haven't tried it yet.
I think he's tried at least to eat it raw one time, didn't he?
Yeah, it tastes good.
Champolici, which means make sweets.
This is a traditional herb, yellow wood sorrel. Some of you guys have probably tasted it. Depending on the growing conditions, it can be bitter or sweet.
Noti alikchi, which is prickly ash.
And that name literally means,
Prickly ash.
it literally means tooth doctor.
Yes.
That tree, if you strip out the inner bark and chew on it, it will make your mouth go numb just like that. Like a lot of natural remedies, they're gentle, they're slow, but this one's not. Like your mouth just goes numb immediately. My problem is I like the flavor of it. Maybe that's a good thing. So we've talked about some plants, that's superficial. Like there are so many more levels of depth with the relationship between indigenous people and plants. And we've tried to recreate some of that, bring that back to life and being asleep on the farm. So we're going to go through some of the other types of harvests besides just those plants with cool Choctaw names. This is a hickory log that was harvested there on the land. And this is the flat end of the log. We've packed clay around the outside of it, and we've put a coal at the center of that clay. It started blowing on it, and it creates basically a blowtorch. And if you do that for a few hours, you burn this big concavity into the log. That was used as a food processing implement called a kipi. This is a kipti and kitapi. This is the same log you just saw. These are dumplings that are made out of corn that's ground up in here, and then it's mixed with blackberries that came from the land and some boiling water. It's mixed up in there again and it's used to make these dumplings. This is the finished product. It's called walakshi. It's a traditional Choctaw wedding dish. It's a dish that we ate at our wedding. You can make it out of lots of different foods. Our place happens to have lots of muscadines, which are, one of our favorites.
This one's called takonoshi, which is the sand plums, which is it grows very well at our place and very good to eat, really.
We gathered 24 quarts of sand plums this year and frozen. A lot of people like to make jelly out of them, but me especially, I just love the flavor of them. So like working out in the pastures on a hot summer day, come back in and just grab a little bag of those that have been frozen. They're better than a snow cone.
Better for you.
Yeah.
This is by Alaska, which means acorn bread.
There are many different species of acorns. They represent one of the best native food crops from the eastern United States. There's lots of detail we could go into about how to harvest ones for different types of culinary properties. I'll be glad to answer questions later. But these particular ones here, we processed by taking off the caps and covers and slowly leaching them with water over a period of weeks, and then grinding them up and making a sticky dough out of it. Putting those on the end of a stick and cooking it just like a hot dog, which actually is a traditional recipe. And it makes acorn bread. It tastes kind of like a Russian tea cake without the sugar. It's really good, really rich.
Uncooked Alaska, which is persimmon bread.
I'm sure you guys have eaten persimmons that are not ripe. For this dish, you take the real good ripe persimmons. Like we'll go gather them and we'll put them in a paper bag for a few days just to make sure that they're all right. Because if you have one that's not ripe, it'll ruin the whole batch of food. We take those, and this is a basket that's made out of native river cane. It's called Ishtioha in the Choctaw language. You can see how it has these holes in the bottom of it. It's got an open sieve kind of characteristic. We'll take the really ripe fruit, push the pulp through the sieve, and then the seeds and the skins stay behind. And you take that pulp and spread it out and basically make fruit leather out of it. It doesn't taste really sweet. It's actually kind of potatoey. It's good, but it's not really the flavor that you might expect from sweet persimmons. This was used as a traveling food because it's lightweight. It's got lots of vitamin C and vitamin A in it. It was also used as a medicine to treat certain ailments.
Koshiba, which is poke salad. Have you ever had that?
So lots and lots of people have eaten this. Obviously, you have to harvest it at the right time. Every part of the poke plant has toxins in it, but also it has lots and lots of nutrients. So there are different strategies for removing most of the toxins and not removing most of the nutrients. One of those is parboiling it. This is parboiling it in a traditional clay pot.
Funky chunksy shilla. Summer grapes. Raisins.
So we have 3 or 4 different species of native grapes on the farm. These are native raisins. You just take the grapes on the cluster like that. You put them near a fire so that it sweats, this moisture starts to come out. That weakens the skin. And then you set it in a warm, dry, sunny place for a few days. And it makes these. They don't look like commercial raisins. And they don't taste anything like commercial raisins. They're actually really great, but they're delicious. They're crunchy and they have these tiny seeds in it. You don't even notice when you're crunching up the grapes. And those seeds are like one of the most nutritious things you could possibly eat.
Selfie okchi, which is sassafras tea.
This is the basis for root beer. Sassafras is where root beer flavoring came from. It's also used as a dye. And it's a heat-sensitive dye. The temperature that you cook it at will affect the color, anywhere from a light tan to a blood red. That's also cooking in a traditional clay pot hung up over the fire.
Dati lagna humachi. Borak dye.
There are lots of native plants that make dye. This one, this is a match coat. It's a traditional winter outer clothing piece. It's made from a brain tan elk hide, and then it's dyed with the heartwood from the bodark tree. Makes that yellow. I've heard from locals, again, it's not necessarily documented that I'm aware of, but I've heard from locals that there was actually a mill in Etoka County that processed bodark seeds and then shipped them all over the middle part of the United States to create the hedgerows that you see right after the Depression.
Pashkano. Hungry for meat.
Unlike English, the Choctaw language has one single word for being hungry for meat. And when you think about things holistically, we would work through the plants, but those plants also feed animals in a way that benefits people. It's all part of this whole loop. So we'll talk about a few ways that we harvest plants through harvesting these animals. So of course, there's the meat from the bison, but then we traditionally tan the bison hides. We brain tan them into robes and different things. This is the process of scraping it. In order to get the hide to dry soft, you have to overcome these natural glues that are inside the hide. And if you're going to make a bison robe, one of the ways to do that is to thin the hide down. You get all of these hide scrapings, just gallons and gallons of dry hide scrapings. You can take those and render them in warm water, and it creates one of the strongest glues in the world. This stuff right here. That was used traditionally for a lot of different things. More recently, it's been used for carpentry glue. To get it soft after you've thinned it, you have to expose the hide to emulsified oils. Those are oils that will dissolve in water. You can do this with the animal's brains, with its liver, with its bone marrow grease. And there are lots of other things too that will do it. Just putting those on isn't enough. You have to keep the hide in motion. You have to keep the fibers sliding back and forth past each other as they dry. So it takes days of alternately putting the materials on and then softening it. The early stages are fun. With a bison hide, you can trampoline it, you can jump around on it. Later on, it's really, really hard work, but it's worth it.
Finished product right there.
There's nothing, very little that's warmer than a bison robe. There are accounts of people getting stuck out on the prairie when it was 40 below with just a bison robe and coming through just fine. There are accounts of people being out on the prairie when a fire came through and they would huddle up under one of these robes and be protected from the flames. They're amazing things. This is a traditional Choctaw dish. The spoon's made out of carved bison horn. The bowl's made out of clay that's mixed with bison bones that are burned and crushed up, and the bone helps keep the native clay from cracking while it's fired.
It's the owa, which means it's a deer hunt, but the word for issy is deer. The deer is issy. And basically they just go out, go hunt and cook a roast over the fire.
You know, humans have removed most of the deer's predators, so the deer are getting out of control in some areas like our area. There are more deer than there naturally should be, and since there aren't a lot of mountain lions around, it comes to us to hunt them and keep them in balance. But even this goes back to native plants. This is a traditional recipe for a deer roast here, and it's cooking on a skewer of sassafras wood over a fire with sassafras smoke, and it's got slits cut in it, little slivers of sassafras put in. Makes it really tasty. Nothing goes to waste with the deer either. I was telling you earlier about the bones being mixed with the clay. This is the process. First, you burn the bone. It changes the form of calcium carbonate so that you can grind it up like this.
To use it in pottery like that.
This is clay mixed with bone. And then the tool that's being used to shape it is carved out of a deer leg bone that was hunted on our land. This is the process of traditional firing. It's a really well-controlled bonfire. If you have bone in the clay, you have to heat it up to a temperature between 1050 and 1200 degrees. So just in a bonfire, you're hitting a temperature window of only 150 degrees. But the way that the clay looks will tell you what temperature it's at. These are finished pieces, traditional eating bowls. You know, they look like they're clay, but they're actually a third deer bone, 2/3 clay. We use the tendons to make bowstrings. We would make bows from the plants on our land too, but a lot of them have thick growth rings, so they're actually not suitable for making bows. A lot of the trees that grow up where we are. These are hides that are brain tan, and then they're smoked with all different kinds of native plant materials that come from the land. They all give it different characteristics and colors and smells. They also protect it from insects. They also protect it from water damage. As part of restoring the purity of the land, there were trash piles out there. This is a piece of scrap glass that came from a trash pile that we picked up, and then we chipped it with a buffalo bone with the arrowhead.
And this is our green home on the range.
So we try to live sustainably. We built a home out there with everything that we were able to do to make it sustainable, light on the land. We call it our stealth house because at night it's just completely dark. There's no light at all because of the insulation in the house and different things. Like you can stand 20 feet away from it and not see it.
All the knowledge that he had came up with, we have put it into this Choctaw food books. And all the inside the book itself, it's got different recipes that we've actually tried in our kitchen that we've both cooked outside and in our kitchen. So it's got kitchen variation. But it also has along with some history along with it. Something similar to what you heard tonight. And also the land, the plants that grow on the land, along with the different names, the Choctaw names, along with the Latin names and the English names for all the plants and stuff that's on the land.
So what we presented tonight just barely scratches the surface of this. It's a long-term research project to revitalize the whole Choctaw foodway. This book follows it through 12,000 years of development, presents over 90 recipes that come from the Choctaw language for indigenous foods that have no European ingredients at all. Almost all of them are based on native plants. 7 years ago, Amy was diagnosed with a form of diabetes. They were recommending chemical treatments rather than start that right off the bat. We both grown up with some traditional foods and decided, well, let's focus more on that. So we already gathered wild plants. We already had a bison, but we focused even more on that. And within 3 months, we lost 70 pounds between us. He was out of the diabetic range. She still is. When we were like that type of diet, it takes quite a bit of time to prepare. It's difficult to just do it for the rest of your life, but you can certainly eat it whenever possible, eat it regularly. When we were hardcore into that diet, like we went a year or two without even a sore throat between us. We had so much energy, just the level of health and well-being is incredible. So this book's about sharing that with the other communities. We also have a blog where we share information, the ups and downs of the experience, get information from other folks. We also do culture camps out there, native plant walks, and lots of fun stuff. So that's a little bit of our experiment on native plants. It's still ongoing. There's still lots to learn, but I think we have learned some valuable things as well. You guys have any questions for us? We have 16 right now. How many other ones? It's too many. You know, it's being counterproductive for our efforts to restore the native tall grass. So we're going to sell some of this soon. We also have Choctaw Ponies out there that came from Amy's grandfather. It's a rare threatened breed, so we have those too.
So ideally, would they travel the whole land in a year or multiple times a year?
It depends on the landscape. So in the past, you know, they would have gone to a place where the best food was. You know, usually that would be where a fire just occurred. You know, they just hammer that area, graze it down. And then over time, you know, what happens to areas that are disturbed? All these disturbance-loving plants come up, things like ragweed, goatweed, camphorweed. Those aren't palatable to the bison. So as a lot of those come up, they're going to move on to the next best area. And that gives the land maybe a couple of years to regenerate. And by that time, it's ready to burn again, and then the bison come back in. That would be ideal. We're not able to fully implement that on our land. So we're experimenting with different habits. You know, some of them haven't been grazed in 3 years. Some of them get grazed a lot more frequently. Some of them get burned in different seasons, and we graze it to see what happens. And there's so many different variables, and slowly we're learning how different parts of our land respond to different treatments.
You ever run into trouble with invasives or poison from neighbors that drift over? Or anything?
Yeah, the Bradford pears are the main invasive in terms of their expansiveness. We have a little bit of Lescavisa. It's not much, but we're trying to get a hold of it because it's so dangerous to spread. And we've got, you know, people in the past planted Bermuda grass on some of our pastures. So that's bad, but it's not quite as bad as it seems because, you know, in a drought time, we don't want to overgraze the native areas we're reestablishing, so we can just hammer those places with Bermuda grass, so it doesn't really hurt anything.
You mean your bison eat Bermuda?
It's not their favorite, but yeah, they do. Their favorite stuff's the, you know, the little blue stem, big blue stem. Their very favorite stuff is the eastern down the grass. That stuff is beautiful. It's drought resistant. Like right now, we've got it in this fall after a burn out there. We burned it, and then there was no cover at all for the whole summer, the whole hot summer, and it still came up. We got that tall. The bison grazed it. It's back that tall again. It's beautiful stuff.
So, no, I know I'm in a native plant place, but have you noticed the birds changing as you return to native plants? Yeah.
Yeah.
Songbirds.
Yeah. Last winter, the winter before, we had 30 bobwhites out there. Wow. Our neighbor who's lived there since the 50s said he hadn't seen it since like the 50s or 60s.
As you were starting out and describing the wonderful diversity of flowers, I thought, well, I wonder what this is going to be like as the climate continues to change. And then you hit that very nicely with the slides and, you know, blast from the future. But this year we had good heavy rain in the spring and early summer, and then just the dreadfully hot, dry later part of the summer. And I wonder if you think that was important in allowing all of these native species to become established and survive through that hot, dry period.
It definitely helped. In our area, you know, we're in mild drought in the early spring, and we got some good rain in the late spring to the very start of June. And we got humid. And yeah, that did help. We've lost some native grasses. You know, some of the native grasses that we're getting established, they're tough, but they're not indestructible. Some of them did die in the drought. You know, management, it will make a big difference, but if climate change is bad enough, there's no management that can overcome it.
Do you do things like cover cropping, you know, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, our cover crop this year for the drought pastures is goat feed.
So you don't have to mess with that at all. You just let it go.
It's, for those of you who may not know, it's this weedy native that's super tolerant to drought. So if the grasses get beat back by drought or overgrazing, it comes up to protect the soil. And just like we were talking about with the bison, they, in the past, they would hammer an area, and then those plants would come up to protect it, the bison would move on. That they do the same thing in drought, or if areas are overgrazed by cattle. A lot of people will come in and spray those, but it's really the natural balance trying to take back over.
So you don't spray them. I bet you don't spray them much, but other than bread.
We spot spray some because the land was so out of balance. Some of our pastures were just covered in thousands of lemons. Like you couldn't even take a step without getting stung. You could be out. So we did knock those back to spot spraying. But that and the rest of these the Bradford bears are things we ever spray.
So, sorry, you probably said it, but the general timeline, you bought this property when, and it went from that pretty poor picture that we saw at the beginning to this in how many years?
We've had the property for 7 years. We've been grazing it in its entirety for 4 years. And it's still, the transition is still not done. It takes a long time. It's come a long way. It's still got a ways to go.
Your story reminds me of like the biggest little farm in California.
Yeah.
Old abandoned farm and brought it back. I'm seeing similar situations, but care for the land and nature is really tough to rejuvenate. It's pretty poor at cloud.
The most effective thing that we found for the biodiversity is to burn an area and then come back right after the burn and scatter native seeds. Last year we got lucky because it snowed right after our burn. We just put them on top of the snow, and then that snow, when it melted, we put them down on the ground. Good soil contact. That's a lot more effective and a lot less effort than putting in 9,000 individual patches of garden.
Was it just you two did that?
So you've accumulated a tremendous amount of knowledge that you've given us, and really impressive presentation. What was the source of all the knowledge? What were the important sources of the knowledge?
A lot of it comes from the Choctaw traditional culture, which we've been students of our whole lives. You know, in our day jobs, we do a lot of cultural programming for the tribe. A lot of it comes from conversations with elders. A lot of it comes from the language. But then an important aspect is practical application too. You know, like actually going out and burning and seeing what it does. Being with the animals, being with the bison, seeing what they do, being out on the land and seeing how the different plants respond to drought or rain, anything like that. So it's a combination of different things.
How much other Choctaws are kind of in their towns with their land and their parcels?
The Choctaw Nation has something like 70,000 acres that the tribe manages corporately. And our forestry department goes out and burns, you know, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of acres each year. The tribe is experimenting with rotational grazing on 50,000 acre range that they manage. They're individual tribal growers. One of them is Evan Rowland. He's been doing this longer than we have. He knows a lot more than we do. His focus isn't necessarily native plants, but it's sustainability and rotation, cover crops, and that kind of thing. And there seems to be some growing interest. You know, it's kind of the thing that requires a good bit of effort. So a lot of people just kind of want to go to the surface, but not really get in and actually do it. But as concerns for environment, healthy food, that thing, the precedents, there's that. The more young people are interested.
You can write a book about, I mean, you wrote a cookbook already, a food book already, is it? You might write a book about this in your spare time.
We don't know what to write about it yet. Like what the writing that we do is our blog, and we publish it at least a post a month. We try to, you know, sometimes it talks about how we failed there, but it's so people can learn this if they're interested.
What's your blog called?
It's Nan Awaya, www.nanawaya.com. Nan Awaya is a place where in Choctaw oral tradition it talks about God creating a lot of the southeastern tribes underground. And then there's a cave that you can still see today, and the different peoples came out through that cave in certain order. And the Choctaw people stayed there, and that's where God made the social order and the ethics for living with the land that we've talked about. Nan Awaya in Choctaw means a place of growth. So we named our farm Nan Awaya in honor of the place of creation, but also because we wanted to be a place where we could grow by learning different things.
Do you have any predators that are starting to become active? Like about the deer, you have, big cats. And
Yeah, there are bobcats that have lived there for years. They have some of the smaller animals. Before we moved in, so it's not because of anything that we've done, but our neighbor had seen mountain lions there, I think 3 times, and black bear once or twice. We've
I
got,
assume you tolerate them.
oh yeah, we love.
Yeah.
We've got beaver that have moved in out there and built several dams and ponds, and that's down there in the sandy seep, and I mean, that place is almost drought proof in that particular area because of what the beaver have done with the water table.
Well, thank you guys very much for coming. And if y'all have other questions like that, a couple more minutes, but again, so big round of applause.